Hello, my name is Naimo Peter and I'm a full-time advisor with the Religious Education team, and I'll be taking you through this CPD experience part 2 of 4. The learning intentions for this CPD session are to appreciate the importance of learning intentions and success criteria for inclusive teaching, learning and assessment in religious education, and to investigate how formative assessment and formative feedback supports student learning in the religious education classroom. As a team in designing this CPD experience, we model the practice of presenting learning intentions to communicate where the learning is going. The first of the NCCA toolkit booklets to support formative assessment in our classrooms is Learning Intentions and Success Criteria. It states that learning intentions describe what the teacher wants the students to know, understand, and be able to do as a result of the learning activities in a given lesson. Modelling good practice, we've just presented you with the 2 learning intentions that are at the core of today's CPD experience. So we're just going to take a moment now to look at what effective learning intentions look like. So effective learning intentions will always be linked to the intended learning. They focus on the learning and not the doing. They're written in student-friendly language, and they focus on what students will be able to do by the end of a lesson. They're broad enough so they do not narrow the range of learning experiences. And there's a nice acronym here which is called SMART, where they are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timed. So let us take a moment to pause and reflect individually on the following 3 statements and see if you agree or disagree with the following statements. If you would like to pause the recording now to give you appropriate time to reflect on the following statements. The first statement is a new learning intention must be created at the start of every lesson. Learning intentions can be created for the entire unit and, where needed, can be created for individual lessons or a series of lessons. The second one states that learning intentions waste valuable class time at the start of a lesson. If students do not have a clear understanding of the learning that is about to take place, learning is less likely to occur. And the final one states, the important thing about learning intentions is that they're written on the board. What is most important is that learning intentions are clearly shared and understood with your class. Writing on the board is one effective way of doing this. We are now going to dip our toe in the water of a unit of learning that we have collaboratively designed. Our starting point is to reflect on the learning outcomes. Learning outcomes are statements in the curriculum specifications to describe the knowledge, understanding, skills and values students should be able to demonstrate after a period of learning. In a moment, we will have the opportunity to engage with this unit of learning. As a team, we have selected 5 learning outcomes that will feature as part of this unit of learning. These learning outcomes are integrated across the 3 strands. They are 1.3, 1.9, 2.7, 3.1, and 3.7. Take a moment to pause and reflect on the following learning outcomes. In order to clearly identify what direction the learning is going, we need to engage with the learning outcomes and decide on the key learning. We've had the opportunity to reflect on the learning outcomes that we are studying as part of this unit of learning. Now let us look at what the key learning will look like when we engage with these learning outcomes. The key learning will be what students are able to demonstrate at the end of the unit of learning. Through exploring the learning outcomes, we must collaboratively reflect on the key learning that is going to take place from engaging with the learning outcomes. For this unit of learning, the key learning that we collaboratively decided as a department was as follows. Values and sources of values. Homelessness as an example of an issue of concern for the world. How a religious charity has responded to homelessness. Research the meaning and purpose of charity in a world religion. How a religious charity shows compassion in their response to homelessness. And research an example of compassion in action from another major world religion. So we just had the opportunity to reflect on the learning outcomes and to unpack the key learning from the learning outcomes. We're now going to look at ongoing assessment. Providing opportunities for ongoing assessment is fundamental for teachers to ensure that the learning has taken place. So for this unit of learning, as you can see on the screen, there are many different assessment check-in points. There will be a prior knowledge check, oral questioning, classroom discussion, research worksheet. The students will present research on compassion in action in a major world religion, and there will be an end of unit test. A form of assessment that I want to bring to your attention is an activity which we completed on the cluster day, asking teachers to collaboratively create a poster describing charity in Islam. We will use this later on to demonstrate success criteria and feedback later in the presentation. From the key learning, you can see that the purpose of this unit of learning, we're going to focus on Islam. This unit of learning could be easily adapted to any of the major 5 world religions or include more than one religion in its theme. In Islam, there are 5 pillars. There are 5 practices that must be followed by all Muslims as a demonstration of faith. One of these is zakat, charity. This is when 2.5% of a Muslim's wealth is given to charity and is compulsory. For Muslims, there is more to charity than zakat. There is also a type of charity known as sadaqah. This is a voluntary charity that is given out of the goodness of one's heart. We're going to explore a number of learning experiences that would be part of this unit of learning. We will also get an opportunity to work on an assignment that is research-based as part of our agreement for the unit of learning. For the lessons that we are now going to experience as part of this unit of learning, the learning intentions are as follows. You will personally reflect on your values and where they come from. You will explore 2 sources of values in Islam, and you will describe charity in Islam. It's important to note that what you experience here is a collection of lessons within this unit of learning. The suggested prior knowledge assessment for this unit of learning was to ask students to reflect on their values and share them. This was to see if students remembered what value was. On our CPD cluster day, we asked teachers to engage with mentimeter.com to do this. This is an online platform that allows you to create and share polls, quizzes and word clouds with your students. On our day, the findings were gathered via a word cloud, and it allowed teachers to collaboratively reflect on some of the values that were within the room. An example of a word cloud from one of our cluster days can be seen on the screen. You might like to pause the presentation here to reflect on what values you consider to be significant. You can do this individually or discuss it with your colleagues. You might like to discuss, if it's not possible to use Mentimeter in your classroom, how would you use a similar prior knowledge with your students? I'm now going to ask you to go to page 4 of your booklet. We're going to engage now with an audiovisual resource, and you might write down some of the values that you see evident throughout the clip. As teachers, there are many ways in which we can get students to engage with the community of faith, such as a guest speaker, interview, an audiovisual stimulus, or even going on a trip. We're now going to do some further research by engaging with the community of faith in Ireland today. In the case, we're going to look at an audiovisual resource from RTE's Nationwide, which aired on the 27th of February, a programme called Journeys of Faith. In this programme, they focused on a young man from Galway who was studying for the priesthood in New York, and members of the Muslim Sisters of Era, an organisation in Dublin. The Muslim Sisters of Era are an independent organisation of mainly Muslim women living in Ireland. They are a voluntary organisation with the purpose of providing support to women. They encourage the integration and work together for the benefit of the wider society. Their work includes promoting a better understanding of Islam and working to raise awareness about Islam and Muslims in Ireland. They provide support to individuals and families experiencing homelessness. So we're going to take a moment now to look at a segment from this programme around the work that the Muslim Sisters of Era are involved with. When you're watching this clip, you might want to jot down some of the values that you see evident throughout the clip.
I was walking down O'Connell Street about 8 years ago and looking at rough sleepers and people I felt are being stereotyped as well. So I was able to connect. You're stereotyped when you're a Muslim woman. You're stereotyped when you're a homeless person, a rough sleeper. You see them in a doorway, you're like, oh, you know, you wouldn't go near him. That's where he wants to be. He's probably strung out. So these kind of stereotyping that I know now that the homeless do have to battle as well. So you see Tesco's La Farm. We've got Tesco's Camel.
Lorraine uses an app to help organise the weekly food pickup.
So this is the Food Cloud app that I get once a week, and it's usually Lidl, Aldi and Tesco's, but at the moment you can see it's Tesco's are the ones that are coming through. I've got 6 stores now to go to. Thanks a million. And we set up with 1 table, 1 flask, a few sandwiches and 1 kind of pot of food. There was only 6 of us at that stage, 6 Muslim women to stand outside the GPO on a Friday night, and the 6 women were all wearing hijab, and they were of different coloured skin, including myself. So I knew I was taking a risk. I was bringing them into a very hostile situation. There was no men around, no men with us. Do you know what I mean? So to take that kind of step to be independent was difficult. And in the beginning, we had a bit of hostility. But now, here we are 2.5 years later, we've 4 6-foot tables. We've 25 volunteers every Friday night. We've a huge spread. Oh, it smells lovely. I can smell the curry. Yeah, I can as well. The relationship with the homeless people it's 100%. I just like, you know, I think when they see what used to happen when they seen Lorraine, and then when I'd start speaking, they'd be a bit hostile, and they'd go, and they'd look at me when they hear the accent, they go, where are you from? And I'd be going, I'm from Gulag, moved to Kabarak, but I'm originally, you know, an outsider. And then they go, why have you got that on your head? And it's lovely, do you know what I mean? But you get to know them. You get to know their stories. Some people just come to your stall for a cup of tea and an ear. That's exactly what they come from, an ear to listen.
A little bit of small soup. Okay. I'll give it to this gentleman here. Thank you. There you go. There you go. Lovely. Thank you.
Any soup? Yeah, we do. We embraced everybody down there at the GPO. One particular family, she was a young woman and she had 3 children, and she was in the hotel accommodation for 3 years, and it was very heartbreaking on her. And she used to come and we'd do a bag shopping for her to last her a few days, and we'd also sometimes get some vouchers for her because they have to buy out every day and school runs and all that. Now, thank God she ended up getting her house, and when she got her house, she now volunteers for us, and that's amazing.
I never ate 4 days.
Okay, can I have another bowl of rice and chicken?
Well, it's people that have been so grateful for the food that you're providing. They're very, very happy, and they're always thanking us all the time, you know, more than what your children would do for us. Yeah, definitely.
On the line here. And we come in, this is our storeroom.
Okay, yeah. The charity supports many projects, not just in Ireland, but across the world.
Last year, the Rohingya crisis was terrible, so we fundraised just over 6,500. We would have loved to send out 40,000, but 6,500 was what we were able to raise. And then earlier on in the year, we did, when Aleppo was being bombarded, we sent out 6,500 to Aleppo. We did Burma as well, and then I just handed a cheque yesterday for 3,500 we raised for the Yemen crisis.
There you go. There's your spoon. Good man yourself, you're on.
One thing that I have to be honest with you that I'm extremely proud of, and I hold it very close to my heart, I've gained trust, friends, loyalty, love, companionship and honour down there with the homeless on the GPO on a Friday night, and I love every single one of them.
And you know what, having helped serve the food with the women, it was easy to see that they are so well regarded by people at the GPO. And
it is clear from watching that short audiovisual clip the values that underpin the work of the Muslim Sisters of Ayr, and also how their work is supporting the marginalised in society. So on our CPD Cluster Day, we presented teachers then with a variety of resources to scaffold their learning in line with the learning outcomes. The resources are available on jct.ie, and the first one is a collection of quotations from the Quran, giving references to charity in Islam. The second is a description of zakat and sadaqah, and the final one is a collection of quotations from the hadith, the words of the Prophet Muhammad. The teachers collaboratively engaged with these resources, and they were used as a scaffold for the assignment to follow, which was creating a poster entitled Charity in Islam. Just like when we talk about planning, we emphasize the importance of planning for assessment at the start. We can also share the assessment with the students at the beginning to scaffold their learning. This puts the student at the centre of the learning experience and allows the student to consider the assessment throughout the unit of learning. For the purpose of demonstrating success criteria and feedback on the day, we asked teachers to create a poster collaboratively describing charity in Islam. Students can be afforded the choice of modality rather than simply a poster, but for the purpose of this experience, we decided on a poster. When researching an ORI, we should always be cognizant of the three elements. We want to provide opportunities for our students to use the elements of inquiry, exploration, and reflection and action throughout the unit of learning. So the sources that we spoke about in the previous slide assisted teachers in gathering information for the assignment of creating a poster describing charity in Islam. They had quotes from the Quran, the sacred text of Islam, the Hadith, the collections of sayings from the founding father Muhammad, and we compiled a number of quotations from each of these for teachers' perusal. We also had a definition of zakat and sadaqah. In your own professional time, you might want to engage with these resources in more detail. There's space in your booklet as well, if you do, to write some notes on the findings from your research. After the teachers had completed some of the research for the poster, and before we embarked on the creation of the poster, we reflected on success criteria. The NCCA toolkit states that success criteria must link to the learning intentions, needs to be planned in advance, needs to be owned by the student and ideally co-constructed by the student, can lead to a more focused and successful teaching and learning, and needs to be broad enough to include all abilities in the class. Success criteria are linked to the learning intentions, and we'll have an opportunity to look at success criteria shortly in more detail. As part of this unit of learning, we asked teachers to create success criteria for a poster describing charity in Islam. Because success criteria is linked to the learning intentions, and the learning intentions obviously are linked to the learning outcomes, it's important that we would consider the learning intentions when creating the success criteria. So we're always referring back to the specification. The assessment is to create a poster describing charity in Islam. You might want to just pause and reflect at this moment and consider what success criteria that you might come up with, taking into consideration the learning intentions. There's space on page 5 of your booklet to jot down some success criteria. That brings this unit of learning to a conclusion. You might want to pause and reflect on this unit of learning. How does it compare with your own unit plans? The next slide is a recap of the planning process that will assist you in future planning. Departmentally, you decide on the learning outcomes, key learning, and ongoing assessment. The learning experiences can be created at departmental level or by the individual teacher. The learning intentions are for the teacher to share with the classes. They do not have to be written in the plan. The success criteria can be created by the teacher or co-constructed with the students. These do not have to be part of the written unit plan either. Again, the important thing about them is that they are shared with the students. Reflection is something that occurs at all stages of the unit of learning, before, during, and after. Reflection can occur at departmental level and individual teacher level, and is useful to record your reflections for your plans, so they are living documents that help you with your future planning. In finding our learning outcomes, the action verbs are helpful because they clarify what the learner should be able to do once they have achieved the learning. You will find a glossary of our action verbs on page 20 and 21 of the booklet, and our poster is available on the website www.jct/religious education in the Planning and Resources section. It is therefore important that we check in on these verbs and refer to their definitions to provide clarity around the learning. So, for the purpose of this unit of learning, the action verbs that we are considering are engage, examine, explore, and research. At the start of planning the unit, we had these action verbs in mind. The second learning intention that we presented in this CPD was to investigate how formative assessment and formative feedback supports student learning in the religious education classroom. The framework for Junior Cycle 2015 states that a dual approach to assessment involving classroom-based assessments across the 3 years of Junior Cycle and a final externally assessed state-certified examination can enable the appropriate balance between preparing students for examinations and also facilitating creative thinking, engaged learning, and better outcomes for the students. The Assessment Reform Group of 2002 highlighted that formative assessment is the process of seeking and interpreting evidence for use by learners and their teachers to decide where the learners are in their learning, where they need to go, and how is best to get there. I'll now ask you to pause the presentation to have a quick check-in reflecting on some of the strategies that you may or may not use to enhance teaching and learning in your classrooms. If you go to page 6 of your resource booklet, you can take a moment to reflect on some of these strategies. It is important to note that the list is not exhaustive or prescriptive, and there may be a variety of other strategies that you engage with to create highly effective learner experiences. However, it is an opportunity for us as teachers to pause and reflect on teaching and learning, and to engage with collaborative dialogue around this area. William and Thompson have identified 5 ways to effectively embed formative assessment into our classrooms. Clarifying, understanding and sharing learning intentions. Engineering effective classroom discussions, tasks and activities that elicit evidence of learning, such as classroom discourse, interactive whole class teaching. Providing meaningful feedback that moves the learners forward. Activating students as learning resources for one another, such as collaborative learning, reciprocal teaching and peer assessment. And activating students as owners of their own learning, such as metacognition, motivation, interest and self-assessment. Talk is the bedrock of all of these strategies, and research has shown that effective talk, questioning and discussion deepens the learning. Talk is used as a tool for learning. We're now going to have the opportunity to look at a short audiovisual clip of Dylan William, guiding us through these 5 pillars of formative assessment.
Now, it is important that children know where they're going, but it's a mistake to think that the best way to do that is always through a narrow learning intention. Sometimes it can't be that precise. If I'm getting kids to balance chemical equations, I do want every single kid reaching the same goal. If I'm getting them to react to a poem by D.H. Lawrence, I don't want them reaching the same goal. And in fact, I would love it if a kid comes up with something that I had never imagined possible. Sometimes I don't have a single goal for the whole class. I have a whole horizon of goals. And it's okay if kids go in different directions. Sometimes telling the students where you're going spoils the journey. It gives the game away. And sometimes it just makes for uninspired and uninspiring teaching. Do you know what? I discovered something. Not all children are motivated all the time. And yet, you know, the idea of sharing a learning intention at the beginning of the lesson assumes that all the kids are really fired up. They're desperate to learn something, anything, just to tell us what we're going to learn today. But you know what? Sometimes a smarter way of starting the lesson is with a question that grabs their attention. Like, why is it colder at the top of a mountain, even though you're closer to the sun? That was a question a kid asked in a class that I was teaching. And I just thought, wow, what an amazing question. I'd never thought of that before. I've realized it, but I'd never thought of it before. And in fact, I found it a very good way of motivating a discussion about a particular issue in geography. So the second strategy is engineering effective discussions, tasks, and activities that elicit evidence of learning, not just questioning, but all the ways you find out where students are in their learning. The third is providing feedback that moves learners forward. Back in 1998, Paul Black and I said that feedback should take the form of comments rather than grades, and to their credit, many teachers copied that advice. Unfortunately, a lot of the feedback that kids were getting, even though they were in the form of comments, wasn't very good. It was just a list of things like, this would have been a better piece of work had you done the following things, but you didn't, so it isn't. As Douglas Reeve says, not so much a medical, more like a post-mortem. And then the last 2 strategies, activating students as learning resources for one another and activating students as owners of their own learning, underscore the fact that the most important instructional decisions in classrooms are not taken by teachers, they're taken by students, as Rick Stiggins says. And so basically it's putting the learner at the heart of the process. Formative assessment is not a process that is done by teachers to students. It is led by teachers, but it actually is done with students to engage students in their own learning.
So Dylan Williams' work found in the NCCA toolkit booklets, and we've had the opportunity to engage with this work through the online experiences. Feedback is fundamental to drive the learning forward. The NCCA toolkit states that effective formative feedback must be focused on the quality of the student work, related to the agreed success criteria, identifies success and achievement, indicates suggestions for improvement, prompts student thinking, and also allows time for improvement to take place. John Hattie in Influences on Student Learning states that the most powerful single moderator that enhances achievement is feedback. The most simple prescription for improving education must be the dollops of feedback, and this does not mean that using many tests and providing over-prescripted directions. It means providing information on how and why the students understands and misunderstands, and what directions the students must take to improve. We're now going to give you an opportunity to reflect on formative assessment. You might take a moment to visit page 7 of your resource booklet. There are 7 scenarios here, and if you would take a moment to reflect on these scenarios and consider whether you think they are formative or not. Pause the presentation if you wish to do this. When you continue, I will reveal the answers. From the 7 scenarios on the page, we have identified 3 that are not formative in their approach. These are number 1, number 4, and number 7. The first one only mentions a select cohort in the class engaging with the brainstorming. The fourth one is clearly summative, and the final one, because the teacher does not engage with the findings of the quiz, is clearly not formative. Dylan William in the previous audiovisual clip alluded to comment-only marking. It's worth reflecting on what are the advantages of comment-only marking. If we reflect on ego-focused versus task-focused research on the slide, we can see that comment-only marking often helps the students to improve and places autonomy on the students to improve by their own effort, embracing challenges and learning from them. You might want to pause and reflect on what are the advantages of comment-only marking. So we already reflected in this session on effective formative feedback. Dylan Williams states that feedback is using information to adapt your teaching and adapt the work of students to put the learning back on track. If you like it, to make sure that the learning is proceeding in the right direction and to support that learning. So on our day, we used a ghost walk to gather feedback from the room on the posters. So teachers walked in silence, reviewing each poster and reflecting on the co-constructed success criteria that we had collaboratively co-constructed within the room. They then used the post-its provided and wrote a formative comment in line with the co-constructed success criteria, and they placed the post-its on the poster, and when they returned to the station, they had an opportunity to reflect on the feedback given within the room. I'm now going to give you an opportunity to reflect on one poster that we produced on one of the PLE days and the success criteria that accompanied this poster. If you would like to take a moment to give some feedback using the agreed co-constructed success criteria as your scaffold. Here is an example of a poster on one of our cluster days, collaboratively designed by a cohort of teachers. Parallel to it is the co-constructed success criteria that we came up with within the room, using the resources presented to the teachers, and it was used as a scaffold for the design of the poster. You might want to pause for a moment and give some feedback based on the co-constructed success criteria. You may consider the following questions. What is done well? Is there anything omitted? If they were doing it again, what might they include to make it better? Having considered success criteria and learning intentions, we're now going to pause and reflect on a video by John Hattie on how communicating the learning target can positively impact students' learning.
Well, the issue of communicating the learning target. Sometimes I think if I was starting the work again, I wouldn't emphasize learning intentions, because too often they become very simplistic and they become almost jingoistic in terms of we are learning this today. The key is those success criteria. And certainly, as many people have said, like Shirley Clark and many others, you need if you're going to do learning intentions, you need learning intentions and success criteria. But it's those two things that go together. It's giving a kid a sense of what is the purpose of the learning here today, and then giving them a sense of what is their evaluative notion of what it means to be successful. Like, think of kids playing video games. They know what it means to be successful, get to the next level. And they're prepared to invest an incredible number of hours to get to that next level. And they get very, very many cues and understandings of what that next level is. In many classrooms, kids think the next level is passing the next test, doing the next problem, doing the next item, doing the next assignment. And that is not very exciting for many of our kids in our classrooms. But giving them a sense of what it means to be successful in the particular history or maths or phys ed or music problem they're doing means they're then part of the solution. They know what it means to learn. They know what it means to be successful in that learning, and therefore they're more likely to engage in it. So I think that notion of how you engage them in understanding what the purpose of learning and what success means, but it's that success which turns out to be much more critical.
These questions on the screen can prompt a useful discussion within your RE department. If you do not have any RE colleagues, you could have this discussion with a colleague in another subject area. To conclude this part of the CPD, you might like to pause and reflect on some of the key learning that occurred during this presentation, using the prompts on page 23 of your booklet. The learning intentions for this session was to appreciate the importance of learning intentions and success criteria for inclusive teaching, learning and assessment in religious education, and to investigate how formative assessment and formative feedback supports student learning in the religious education classroom. The learning intentions for the other sessions are displayed on the screen. On behalf of the religious education team, I would like to thank you for engaging with this CPD. If you'd like to access further supports, please access our website on www.jct.ie, follow us on Twitter at jct_re, or send in your queries by email to info@jct.ie. Please remember to take time to give us feedback on the CPD via the link on the website. Thank you.